we're not in the technology business doing education. We're in the education business doing technology. And that's the lens that you're taking to it. And I think that's the lens that educators should take to it as well.
Excited to welcome on the guest in this episode, Jake Miller, who I have to say, even though we're on the same podcast network, it's not the reason I'm saying this. I am a very big fan of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast and a fan of your work in general. Really glad to have you on here, Jake, so welcome. And if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'm a big fan of Leader of Learning as well, and we get to share some space on the Education Podcast Network page for both of our shows. But as you said, I'm the host of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast, which is a podcast that focuses on EdTech. And I'd say EdTech is kind of my passion. Education is my job, and EdTech is my passion. I just geek out about educational technology. I'm based out of Ohio. I'm currently teaching 8th grade science. So the last 4 years or 5 years previous to that as a technology integration specialist. But it's kind of fun being, well, it's virtual right now. Actually, by the time this airs, we'll be hybrid. But it's kind of fun taking all the things that I've been, trying to sell other teachers on for years and now putting them back in practice in my own classroom, my virtual classroom and my real classroom.
Yeah, I've been in that position before. I was an instructional coach at a school for about 3 years. So I shifted, from being a classroom teacher to out of the classroom for a few years. And then the position, unfortunately, was cut due to some budgeting and shifting around of some grant funding. And I was put back in the classroom. And that was really the thing that I looked forward to the most. I said, you know what? I was upset, to be honest, I was upset about having to go back in the classroom. But at the very least, I got the opportunity to try for myself the things that I was coaching everyone else on for the past 3 years before that. And especially in the technology world, it really allowed me the opportunity to just do it with my own classroom and my own students. It was really cool.
Yeah. Last time I was full-time in the classroom, a lot of the tools that I use now either didn't exist or were just kind of a twinkle in the creator's eye, like things like Flipgrid and Peardeck and things like that. They weren't around, either they were just starting out when I was last full-time in the classroom.
Yeah. I remember like Nearpod is one that I use quite a bit, and they had made a lot of improvements and adjustments between when I was in the classroom, and then I took a break for a few years and came back, and it was great to be able to come back around and use like much more of a full-featured product.
Right.
I guess I did want to ask you though, I know you said that we are recording a couple weeks out, and by the time this releases, you might be in a hybrid model. How's the virtual going though?
It is the hardest work I've ever done, to be honest with you. I end my day completely and totally drained and taxed. It's the hardest work I've done. At our particular school, we have a plan where we have hours worth of daily live Zoom calls with our students, which is just spending a lot of time sitting in front of the webcam is really taxing. The thing I'm glad about is that I feel like, despite the fact that we're virtual, I have really good rapport with my students because I have all these live opportunities and because I've really put that at the forefront of what I'm doing. So I feel like it's not the rapport I'd have in person, but I'm feeling pretty proud of the rapport that I've been able to build with them. But yeah, it's really hard work being fully virtual with lots of Zoom calls in there. I'm sure the grass is always greener, as they say, but I kind of pine for the opportunity to teach more asynchronously virtual because I geek out about the designing of curriculum activities, and I don't get as much time to craft that because everything's live, whereas if I could be creating more asynchronous hyperdocs and things like that, I think I'd be more excited about that. But I don't know, grass is always greener. Who knows?
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. I'm wondering, when you do go to a hybrid model, will you still have opportunities for that asynchronous learning for students who are at home, or will you do a lot of like what a lot of schools near me and my district do, which is having kids who are at home use a web conferencing tool of someone's choosing, whether it's the teacher or the school, and join synchronously?
Yeah, that's what we're doing. So I will be live teaching 8 kids or 12 kids or whatever the number is in my room, and live teaching 8 to 12 at home at the same time, which is going to be a special kind of struggle bus, I foresee.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned like the grass isn't always greener. I don't know. We're definitely struggling with that. Now, I'm wondering if we were given the opportunity to be virtual first like you are, if maybe that would
Mhm.
have made it a little bit easier. Because I think one of the hardest things has been teachers and especially student at home students. Our students come in to the students who are in the hybrid model and haven't chosen and opted to stay home full time. They only come into school 2 days at a time. And when they're not in school, and of course the kids who are fully, full time remote, teachers are definitely having a hard time engaging them and getting
Yeah.
them to be on and stay on for the amount of time that they're supposed to be. Basically the schedule is the schedule, and whether you're in school or you're not, you're in that class when you're supposed to be, or else. And I guess I wonder if we were virtual first, if that would have helped at least a little bit.
Yeah, maybe it certainly builds, the system for how we go about doing things, right? And builds in those expectations. And now I know our students are really eager to be in person, even though they'll be masked up and 6 feet away from each other and walking one way down halls and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. Crazy because good because it's what we have to do, but still crazy to think about having to do it. And they are eager to be back in person. So I guess maybe that's kind of the silver lining there, is that this is going to go better because the kids see it as a upgrade.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worked well, and I have been really glad and grateful to be back in person, at least for the staff and some of our students. Now, I wanted to get back to, I don't want you to think that I glossed over this, because I think it's a really important point. You mentioned that one of the bright spots has been your ability to connect with and build rapport and relationships with your students, albeit virtually. And I
Hmm.
think that in hybrid models and in schools like mine, and yes, I am speaking from personal experience here a little bit, it's been very difficult for teachers to build those relationships with the students who are not in front of them. And schools like yours, so far, none of the students have been in front of you. And I guess I just wanted to ask you maybe for advice, or just anything that you thought may have helped you specifically in that virtual environment to be able to build rapport with students, and especially if it's been different from the way that you've done it in person, in the past, before all the guidelines and the precautions.
Hmm. Yeah, it's definitely been different because I feel like in the classroom in person, like pre-February of 2020, the way that I tended to build rapport was more in one-on-one or small group conversations with students, maybe as they're entering the classroom or leaving the classroom, or during some time where kids are all working at their own pace and I can just chat with kids. And there's not as many opportunities for that now. So I feel like that's less of what I'm doing, is that kind of one-on-one stuff like that. Instead, what I'm doing, and I think even though I'm not saying it vocally to my students, I think they feel it and see it, is that I'm making the time to just talk with them and have fun with them and play like little games with them and stuff like that. I'm making that a priority, and I'm showing that that is more important to me than my curriculum. Hopefully, my administrators aren't listening too carefully here, but I think the kids feel that and sense that, right? So I try to do things in every one of our live lessons that shows that that comes first on my agenda, is making sure I'm connecting with them. So whether it's just something simple like asking them to type in the chat something they're looking forward to about the weekend, or a highlight from the previous weekend, or something slightly more leveled up that's a little more complex. Like anytime I use Peardeck, we'll do a thing, and this would work in Nearpod or AnswerPad or any of the similar tools too, where I will draw. And I think I got this idea from Amanda Sandoval, I think is who I first heard it from. I'll just draw like a squiggle on the screen, and then they will complete the squiggle with a drawing, and then we'll spend time as a class looking at the drawings and laughing at what they drew and trying to guess who drew what and what they were trying to draw, and picking our favorites. And it might take up 10 minutes of class, but I feel like that's 10 minutes of rapport built that's leverageable for me. When one student struggles on a test and I go back to them with some feedback, I have a baseline of rapport that I could work off of there. Or when a student forgets to do the work, or whatever's going on, I have that rapport that I could utilize and leverage in that situation. And so it supports me as a teacher, but also for them. Like, I just want them to be okay. Like, I worry about how my kiddos are feeling right now in this current situation. So it really is a priority to me to make sure we're having some fun in the room.
Well, that's great, and I think that is good advice for teachers out there, to think that it's not as important right now, maybe, to bombard students with curriculum as it is that teachers shouldn't feel like they're being bombarded with curriculum as well at this point. We're still only about 2 months in to the school year by the time this episode releases, and we're very early on in something that no one has ever experienced before. Heading into this school year, I kept saying that I thought the biggest positive to all of this, regardless really of what model a school was using, is the opportunity to really personalize and differentiate learning for students in ways that we've never really thought about before. And I still hold true to that belief. I'm hoping to see it even more as we continue in these models. But I think that's a great start, what you were talking about, where it's like, look, you have to get to know the students as as people, as learners. I had a discussion with a teacher at school when I was kind of doing my coaching thing the other day, and we use a reading program, and I said, it's not so much about the program or even the data that it generates. It's about just understanding your students in terms of who are they as readers. Otherwise, I'm afraid that teachers just wouldn't know what students are capable of and what kind of skills they possess or not. So I really think that's a great first step. I appreciate that advice. I did want to shift gears, though, to the real reason I have you on, which is to talk about EdTech. And, at this point, safe to say you can't do virtual at all, and very tough to do hybrid even with no educational technology and instructional technology to lean on. I know you have these 4 MVPs, so I guess that's where I wanted to start. What are the big tools and the platforms and programs that you go to first for your instruction in terms of the virtual learning and even when you go hybrid?
Yeah, so as last spring kind of ended, as the school year wrapped up, I kind of reflected on what I saw happening in classrooms and in schools, and I felt like everybody was in survival mode, and then I thought, okay, now we could really think about what we're going to do next year, because this looks like it's going to be part of our, at least the short-term future. And so I thought about what are the things that are best for educators. And so I thought about it from the same perspective I take a lot of things, which is what my podcast is built around, which is the idea that educational technologies are best when we're seeing them as a tool, not when we're seeing them as the focus or the goal. And that's where the duct tape comes in, educational duct tape, right? It's a tool that we use to solve problems. We're not just using duct tape. It's a tool. So I thought about, okay, so what are the problems? What are the goals that we have as educators, especially now if we're remote learning, but also just any time that we're teaching students? And I came up with a list about 15 goals. Anywhere from giving students feedback to engaging instruction to getting feedback from the students to connections with the families to differentiation. And as I went through these goals, I said, okay, now I got these 15 goals that are my goals. What tools help me knock off a lot of these goals? Because there are tools that help me hit a few of them here and there. But I said, what are kind of my high yield technology tools that I could say as a teacher, I could use this tool, just that, and be in really good shape. And so the tools that I found were Flipgrid, which one of my very favorite tools. And it literally hits 13 of my 15 goals really, really well.
And actually, I'm going to stop you there for a second, and I'll get to the next 3. But I want to stop on Flipgrid for a second, because actually tomorrow, coincidentally, my school has a professional development day, full day PD, and the administration, to their credit, in my opinion, did the right thing where they said, at this point, there are teachers who are doing well in terms of their ability to engage students in a hybrid model, and there are other teachers who are a little bit slower on the uptake, and that's fine. Again, that's the differentiation piece. But they're having some of us who are a little more adept with technology and doing it a little bit better lead professional development, and Flipgrid was the tool that I chose, for the sheer fact that I think the Flipgrid Shorts camera is the tool for our teachers to use to create really great instructional videos. If you want to have a mini lesson, have some direct instruction where you're, especially in that asynchronous model, creating a video for your students. I love when teachers use Flipgrid, because you can share your screen if you want. You can have a whiteboard. You can mess around with all the filters and things too. It's a lot of fun. So that's what I'm going to present on actually tomorrow. So I really like Flipgrid for, like you said, all the things that it does, but especially that aspect of it.
Yeah, well, it's probably the most flexible educational technology tool that we have, especially now that they added in that Flipgrid Shorts camera, so that not only can we use it to hear from our students, but when I just need to send a message to parents, or I need to, introduce a topic to my students, or help them with, give them some feedback and some support on something they're having problems with their asynchronous work, like I could just really quickly record a video in there and send it out there. So it could do almost all of the things you need to do, and that's why
Yeah.
that's that first
My
of those
goal,
MVPs is Flipgrid.
Yeah, my goal actually, I don't think I'll have enough time in this session tomorrow. It's only half an hour, but my goal is actually to get teachers, like an app smash, to get teachers to use Flipgrid Shorts camera to record a brief video and then put it into Nearpod and have the Nearpod video feature be able to splice it up and embed questions and basically use it as a more interactive assessment type of a tool for students as well. But I don't think, like I said, I don't think we have time for that yet.
Yeah, yeah, half an hour. That'll be a time crunch there.
Right. So number one of the four MVPs, I listen to a sports talk show sometimes here in the New York area, and they always talk about like the Mount Rushmore of sports figures. This is like the Mount Rushmore of EdTech.
Absolutely.
So number one is Flipgrid. What are the other ones?
So a screencasting tool, whatever screencasting tool you choose. Most educators choose between Screencastify and Loom. I think they're both great tools. Some educators choose Screencastomatic, which I like a lot because it has some closed captioning capabilities in it. And some educators choose, as you alluded to, using just like Flipgrid Shorts and recording their screen in there, but having some way to create some kind of videos that it's different kinds of videos depending on what you're teaching, but a tool that you create those videos with. So that's the second one, is whatever screencasting tool you choose. The third is EdPuzzle. I think if you're using video in asynchronous remote learning and you're not using EdPuzzle, number one, to make sure your kids are watching it. Number two, to formatively assess them as they're watching it. And number three, to use that formative assessment to support the kids. I think if you're not using EdPuzzle for that stuff, you're crazy. And then the last one.
There. Sorry, I'll get to the last one too. I hate to keep cutting you off.
No,
just curious, as you're talking about EdPuzzle, I love EdPuzzle too. But I'm also a big Nearpod guy. And I know on your show and in general, you've kind of done that research into like comparing Nearpod and Peardeck, and they're pretty similar. What about Nearpod video versus EdPuzzle?
Yeah, it's pretty close to as good. It's one of those situations where, just like we were saying with the screencasting, like if you're a teacher who maybe isn't super comfortable using lots of technologies and you've learned to use Flipgrid to gather student responses, maybe just use that for your screencasting too. Like don't learn Screencastify and Loom, just use Flipgrid for that. And so I think the same is true here. If you're using Nearpod to deliver lessons and do some formative assessments, and then you need to do similar stuff with videos, maybe just use Nearpod for that too. I think EdPuzzle is slightly better at the video part and getting some data out of video. But I think that what makes Nearpod better is that they could build that video in with other content too that's not related back to the video, right? And like I said, if you've learned to use one tool and that other tool can do 95% of what EdPuzzle can do, then why not do that? So I think choosing Nearpod in that situation is a good choice too.
Okay. So number one, Flipgrid. Number two is Screencast of your choice, which actually, I got to be honest, I'm getting to be a much bigger fan than I ever was before, only because I never really knew how to use it, of WeVideo. And even for screencasting. Love WeVideo. So that was number two, is screencasting tool. Number three, EdPuzzle, or maybe if you're comfortable using Nearpod for that video, that interactive video, embedding questions and using it as formative assessment. And then number four
is Peardeck or Nearpod. We mentioned them both. And some teachers use the answer pad and a couple other different tools out there as well. But Peardeck and Nearpod are a couple of big ones there. The reason I always hit that one fourth is because you could put a Flipgrid prompt into Peardeck or Nearpod. You could put a Flipgrid short into Peardeck or Nearpod. You could record your video with Screencastify or Loom or Screencastomatic or WeVideo and put it into Peardeck or Nearpod. You can create your EdPuzzle and then put it into Peardeck or Nearpod. So that's kind of like the crown on top because it puts them all together. I've got to say, of these four tools, because I'm currently teaching synchronously virtual, Peardeck is the one I'm using the most. And Nearpod is, I love both Peardeck and Nearpod. I just happen to be at a Peardeck school right now. And so that's one I'm using. But I find that in synchronous work, that one is huge for me, using Peardeck.
Cool. I'm wondering, if is there a learning management system or Google Classroom or Microsoft Teams or something like that that you would prefer or that you would recommend in terms of, I guess, just, organizing the class, rolling out assignments, keeping your kids engaged, stuff like that?
Yeah. So I think absolutely you have to have something like that. The reason that I don't even include that in this list is because normally, in my experience, that's not even a teacher's
Hmm.
choice, right? It's dictated to them what to use, and I think they're all really good. I think it's more about how you use it. That's what's important here in that decision. And so I find that educators don't typically have a power to choose which one to use. I currently use Google Classroom. I've used Schoology before and absolutely love Schoology. Some educators will reach out to me and say, "Hey, do you recommend Google Classroom or Schoology?" And it's almost apples and oranges because one is super slick and easy to use, and one is relatively easy to use but does a whole lot more. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. I think you've got to have a tool like that in place, but which tool it is kind of depends on what you're trying to get out of it, and oftentimes it depends on what your administrator says to use.
Yeah, I know. I mean, definitely at my school, or really in my whole district, secondary classrooms use Google Classroom, and it is what it is. However, I know that the district is going to be, especially toward the end of this school year, shifting from Google, or what are they calling it now? The Google
Google
Workplace,
Workplace.
Google
Yeah.
Enterprise, is whatever it is, going away from Google and toward Microsoft and Microsoft Teams.
Mhm.
So we've been kind of starting to make that transition already. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I think whatever you use, you gotta have something. Unfortunately, maybe it's not the teacher's choice, but some way of keeping things organized. I was also wondering if you said before, and I love the advice again about really building relationships with students before hitting them with any kind of curriculum, regardless of what subject you teach or what level you teach. Any other tips, tricks, advice that you might be able to give teachers specifically when it comes to using the technology? One of the things that I like to offer up for advice is, still use the technology. Like maybe, for example, the session I'm doing tomorrow, use Flipgrid or anything to make an instructional video, but please keep it short, especially in virtual settings or even hybrid where you have many students who are at home. Like, they're not going to want to sit through something real long. So keep it short and simple, but as engaging as possible, as interesting as
Yeah.
possible. That's always my kind of go-to advice. Anything else?
Yeah, and that's good advice too. Like in that situation, I tend to tell educators think about what you would like if that was you in that situation, right? Think about when your administrator or your college professor or your professional development provider or whoever it might be sends you some kind of content to learn from. Like, do you want it to be a 22-minute long video, right? Do you want to just sit and passively watch it? Do you want it to be scheduled at a certain time, or do you want it to be asynchronous? So that's my first piece of advice: is think about what you would prefer as a learner, even as a professional, what you would prefer. Another thing too is with talking about hearing from your students and creating that rapport. I think the first person I heard really emphasize this point was Stacey Roshan when she was on my podcast. But she said I think Mike Mohammed also iterated the same idea. When they ask for some kind of response from kids, they show the kids that they're listening to what the kids are saying, right? Sometimes it's okay, like a writing teacher would say, that you don't have to grade everything they write, right? And that's true. Like we drive ourselves crazy if we try to do stuff like that. But if you're going to do a Peardeck in class, or if you're going to do a Flipgrid in class, you've got to focus on, at some point in time, showing the kids that, hey, you're receiving that message on the other side, so they see that you're valuing what they're sharing with you. And maybe you don't watch all the videos, maybe you don't respond to all the Peardecks, but they should all be seeing that you're listening to and hearing what they're saying to you, and you're connecting back with them on it.
That's a great point. Yeah, that I appreciate that. I think, like you said, it's tough, especially in these times where teachers feel like and quite literally are doing so much. Even simple things like just taking a moment to let someone know that you heard them, or
Mm-hmm.
you saw their video, or that you received it.
Mm-hmm.
I think can really go a long way. We are going to start to wrap up here. I really appreciate your time, and I love talking about this stuff. I try not to do too much ed tech, to be honest, on the show, but it is so crucial right now. And,
Hmm.
I'm an instructional coach, which I know sometimes tech coaches are called all sorts of things. I'm not really a tech coach, but of course, in these times right now, I feel like that's so much of what I'm doing. And I guess in a way, I'm finally being able to have the opportunity to use technology in my instructional coaching in ways that I've been trying to do for years. So in that regard, it's been somewhat beneficial for me. But I do really enjoy ed tech, and I love talking about it. So I appreciate you coming on, and especially that you shared that piece about what makes educational duct tape what it is, which is like we're using the tools. It's not
Yeah.
the technology is not everything, but it's just something to get you to where you need to be, and more importantly, get your students to be where they need to be.
Yeah, and it kind of comes back to what you're in as your situation as an instructional coach, where your focus is on the student learning and the pedagogy and the curriculum and things like that, and you're really leveraging the technologies as tools. And I think that's the really good thing about a person in your shoes that likes educational technology and is comfortable with educational technology, but is really coming at their job from a pedagogy angle, because that's the way we should be coming at it. Like we're not. We're not in the technology business doing education. We're in the education business doing technology, and that's the lens that you're taking to it. And I think that's the lens that educators should take to it as well. One thing before we wrap up that I want to point out is, even though there's a list of 4 MVPs that we just went over and a couple other things we kind of gave shout outs to as we went, you don't have to use all of them, right? Especially, I know you have some listeners who don't come to you to hear from educational technology, so they might be feeling like, whoa, this is a lot of stuff right now. And I want to make sure they know that the tools that you should use are the tools that solve a problem or meet a goal for you and your learners. And it doesn't have to be all the tools, and it doesn't have to be the same tool as the teacher in the room next to you either. It just has to be the tools that work for you and your content and your students.
Love that. I really can't wrap up any better than that. So I'm just going to end it right here and just thank you for your time and ask you to please share any contact information that you could, in case listeners do want to reach out to you for more information or any kind of questions or concerns that they might have.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So my site is jakemiller.net. You could find out more about the podcast at eduducttape.com. And you could find me on all of the social medias at Jake Miller Tech. And I'd love to connect. I am such, as we said at the beginning, I geek out about education, educational technology. So I really don't mind getting the messages and questions and shares and things like that on social media and things like that. So please do reach out.
Excellent. Jake, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.